Mr. Chairman,
Seeks recognition.
I have unanimous consent requests.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for a UC.
I asked unanimous consent to enter into the record an article titled, During January 6th hearing, Schiff doctored text messages between Mark Meadows and Rep. Jim Jordan. This was an article in the Federalist, December 15th, 2021.
Without objection. Who's next on our side? Ms. Jackson-Lee. Gentleman from Texas, recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you. I asked to strike the last word. I want to follow up on my friend from California, Mr. Issa, about the importance and the level of cruciality, I use that terminology, of this committee's work. It is constitutionally grounded, and there's no other committee in the House and its counterpart in the Senate that has the custodial responsibilities of the accuracy and the integrity of the Constitution. That means that we should take our work extensively and very seriously. We can begin to quote documents which include the very essence of our message. And I always like to remind you that the Constitution begins by saying, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. But I'd like to focus on the idea of establish justice. We can procedurally try to maneuver my good friend's inactions of not showing this committee respect by not appearing and responding to the subpoena. I called Chairman Jordan my good friend because we've worked together for years. But you did not show up and present yourself to this committee, whether or not it was in this session or the last session. Now, as we proceed, we will hear on the other side a constant pointing to members who did their service on the January 6th committee. They will take pot shots at Mr. Schiff. They will find dated and unheard commentary that they will utilize, which I believe will continue to diminish the importance and integrity of this particular session and constitutional responsibilities of impeachment. I, too, was going to have misgivings of the amendment that would have joined Mr. Jordan, because I am not ceding the point that Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, should be held in contempt. And I will continue that approach through the rest of this markup. There is no evidence. How can you have evidence of contempt when you have an open and public statement that I will appear? I will appear. I will use my constitutional rights of appearing with counsel, and I will come before the committee. I was there on that day when he was available to come. How can you argue that he did not come when you made no effort to indicate that we are waiting for you in the hearing room, set up for you to come now and speak? That was not done. And if I want to go a step further, I'm not suggesting to Mr. Biden that I would want that to be the case, but no law enforcement was sent to direct him to the Judiciary Committee room in 2141 Rayburn on the House side. And so you cannot make an argument that Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, should be held in contempt. The only argument you want is to continue to give a circus-like atmosphere to this very important committee that, under the Constitution, is to be able to establish justice. Justice. There is no cause for what we're doing today. There is no basis for it. There is no evidence for it. There is no reason for it. Again, I do not believe Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, should be held in contempt. All of the allegations that you have are simply that. Allegations of the abuse of power, the misuse of the relationship of father and son, all of that has to be proven. But you are going at it, and we will hear all of these bits and pieces and drops from the January 6th committee and so-called interactions between members on that committee that you either like or dislike, and we all will probably have a say in that. You cannot take away the sacred responsibility of the January 6th and this committee that is constitutionally grounded. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. I would not have been happy voting on that particular amendment because I think that yours should have been separate. And I do not believe that Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, should be held in contempt at all, because I was there with you, Mr. Chairman, on that day, and you did not seem to make any effort to make sure that Mr. Biden knew he was welcomed in that committee at that time for us to hear him in an open setting. With that, I hope that we can establish justice in this committee for once and for all, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I submit that whenever you have an issue under debate, the surest sign of weakness in an argument is to avoid the question, to talk about anything but the question in issue. Now, I do compliment the gentlelady from Texas for her point just made. She focused on the issue, but I do eagerly undertake her challenge. She says you cannot make an argument that Hunter Biden is in contempt. How can you argue he will not come? She said, when he said he would come. Well, here's how. He was issued a subpoena for a deposition. He stated publicly and in correspondence that he would not testify in a deposition, that he wanted to do it his way in an open hearing. Well, that's contempt. And it is open and shut, cut and dried, as simple as it can possibly be. So that the subject under debate is whether an ordinary citizen who defies a subpoena of a congressional impeachment inquiry should be held to account. And there is also no need really to debate that. Quite to the contrary from the suggestion of the gentlelady from California, the weight is all on the other side. And interestingly enough, in the matters of Bannon and Navarro, every member of the minority is on record to that effect. Indeed, members of the minority have gone farther than that. Mr. Raskin has specifically addressed the purported basis for objection that Hunter Biden has offered, stating that the proper course is to first have private testimony in a deposition to explore facts thoroughly and in the way that mode of examination permits, and then to have a public hearing after. Nobody that I can recall in the minority took issue with that point. But here's really the salient and final aspect that makes this clear beyond argument. This may be the most brazenly recalcitrant witness defying Congress in the history of the Congress that I'm aware of. Now, there may be some other situation in which this has been done. But the person who is subject to the subpoena, I hear the laughter on the other side, so let me go further. I don't know that anyone has ever come onto the complex in the shadow of the United States Capitol building, suborned and assisted by another member of Congress, a member of this committee, stood in the triangle and vowed to the media that he was defying the subpoena of a congressional impeachment inquiry. I don't know that that's ever been done. And I certainly don't believe that it's ever been the case that a member of Congress has made arrangements for that brazen defiance of Congress to be expressed on the Capitol, in the Capitol complex, on the plaza. So if you want to talk about the issue, it is not a close call. If you want to talk about what happened in the previous Congress and whether Congress can subpoena members of Congress to testify before a committee, especially when that committee has falsified and fabricated evidence to its eternal shame, then you can talk about those other issues. And I would if I were you, because you certainly cannot meet the simple proposition that is before us now.
Would the
certainly
yield?
Cannot deny the duty of this committee to respond to that brazen defiance.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will.
And I promise I'll yield back to you down the road. But the point I would just make here is that the difference between Hunter Biden and, as you mentioned, Navarro and Bannon, is that Navarro and Bannon totally stonewalled Congress. They didn't produce any documents. They didn't offer to testify in any way, and they didn't provide any testimony of any kind. By contrast here...
Let me take my time back, because I've only got another 20 seconds. And I don't want to just leave, and we'll come back to it and have further colloquy if you like. And I appreciate the gentleman from Maryland's collegial interaction. I think that is a distinction without a difference. I don't think, in fact, I think it makes it worse that Hunter Biden goes to media and declares and decides how he will testify to Congress. He will come to a public meeting, but he will not do what Congress has commanded by a lawful subpoena. I don't think it's a distinction that favors him. I think it's one that requires us to act. And my time's expired.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I appreciate the passion from my friend across the aisle and the outrage. I think we're all outraged about many things. But if we're going to talk about outrageous things that have happened or things that have never happened, let's talk about the fact that President Trump incited an erection. And maybe that too.
Yeah, you could talk about that too, I guess.
Maybe we should talk about that too. The president incited an insurrection. Maybe we should talk about the fact that the former president was impeached twice. Maybe we should talk about the fact that the former president was convicted on 91 felony counts. Maybe we should talk about the fact that the former president was charged with interfering with our elections. Maybe we should talk about the fact that most, if not all, of the members of this committee, certainly leaders in the House, have continued to support and endorse a person who has literally talked about being a dictator from day one. So, Mr. Chairman, I believe this markup is an unbelievable waste of time. My Republican colleagues have been investigating Hunter Biden for years. My colleague, Mr. Ivey, just gave very important statements about why this is a different case than others that have been cited. There's been no indication whatsoever that any of his activities are connected to the president. They have turned up nothing. So why are we really here today? It is another distraction from the fact that, in the words of one of my colleagues on the other side, in this committee, by the way, said on the floor of the House, this Republican-controlled do-nothing Congress has not delivered one thing that Republicans can go home and say that they delivered to their constituents. In fact, this Congress is on track to be one of the most unproductive in modern history. This Republican-led House has only passed 27 bills that became law in spite of holding 724 votes. We still have no reauthorization of the Farm Bill, no bringing to the floor of a bipartisan bill that we passed in this committee around surveillance reform. We are on the verge of a government shutdown, and you just compare that to 2022, when Democrats controlled the House with a razor-thin majority. We held 549 votes, and 248 bills were signed into law. Now, none of this inaction stops my Republican colleagues from celebrating all the funding for infrastructure and jobs that Democrats passed without a single Republican vote. Not a single Republican voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, and yet there are many that go home to their constituents and keep crowing about how they're bringing money home from bills that they never voted for. But aside from claiming the work of Democrats, Republicans have no achievements to run on. And the American people should make no mistake that this hearing is pure political distraction. My colleagues would have you forget that under the Biden administration, 2.7 million jobs were created just last year, more than any year under the previous administration. That is a total of 14.3 million jobs created under President Joe Biden. My colleagues would have you forget that starting this month, more Americans with diabetes will finally see sharp decreases in insulin prices. Thanks to President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, people on Medicare now pay no more than $35 a month for insulin prescriptions. That is money in people's pockets at home. And these efforts put pressure on drug makers to lower their prices for people not on Medicare as well. House Democrats also passed and President Biden signed into law making historic investments to lower prescription drug prices. We extended health care coverage to millions, health care that Republicans are just trying to take away, acted on climate change, spurred American chips manufacturing, all while creating millions of jobs, and finally starting to ensure that the wealthy pay their fair share in taxes. And that's not to mention that we as House Democrats used our gavels to pass the Women's Health Protection Act to protect the right to decide whether or not to have an abortion. We passed landmark legislation to protect voting rights, to protect the civil rights of LGBTQ Americans, common sense gun safety reforms, legislation to provide a roadmap to citizenship to dreamers and farm workers, bills that provided an increase to the federal minimum wage and protecting the right to collective bargaining, all with the slim margins that Republicans now blame for gridlock. What we did the last two Congresses is what real leadership looks like. We didn't waste months of staff time and taxpayer resources chasing empty investigations to score cheap political points. Reject this bad faith resolution, and let's focus on things that actually deliver for the American people. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we're going to dig through the law, we're going to dig through the statutes, we're going to dig through the rules, and it's important. But I want to talk about what the man on the street, the man and woman on the street really sees here. And it's called rules for thee, but not for me. Democrat leaders in their desperate attempt for power continue to rewrite the rules in an effort to maintain that power. They're manipulating the courts to keep a political opponent off the presidential ballot. They disregard democracy by all but canceling their own primary process to make sure that they coronate President Biden. Democrats on TV openly endorse the chaos on the border, claiming illegal immigration is a way to help them with future redistricting. That's what it's really about. A party that is desperate for power. Leaders that are desperate for power can never be trusted with it. And I pray that they don't get it, because it will rip apart the fabric of this country. The pattern we see here paints a clear picture, and it's what people on the street see. Democrat leaders believe they are better than all of us, better than everyone else. And there's no clearer example than Hunter Biden. A man who's paraded around the world with our adversaries, a man who cheats on taxes to the tune of millions of dollars, a man who spends that tax money on escorts, drugs, alcohol, and luxury hotels, a man who illegally obtains a gun and then illegally disposes of said gun and was going to get off with hardly a slap on the wrist. Any other American wouldn't receive that type of justice. A deal that would have cleared him of all illegal acts. Unbelievable. We had an honest judge who never saw anything like that, and she couldn't even do it for the president or the vice president. The corruption is so blatant, it's hard to believe when you say it out loud. The truth is, Hunter Biden's a bad guy. And his corruption goes all the way to the top, all the way to the president. And he needs to be held accountable. As for members of this very committee that have gone out of their way, a particular member, to help orchestrate the criminal act of defying a congressional subpoena, and let me address that. This is a standing committee of the United States House of Representatives. It isn't a select partisan hack committee set up by the former speaker that didn't hear anything from the other side of the aisle. Totally different. You can't relate one to the other. And of course, Mr. Jordan was willing to go, would have gone, but just wanted an outline of what the issues were really going to be, never received that. And the reason they didn't hold him in contempt, the reason that they didn't give him the information that they needed, because they knew they were on faulty ground. They knew that they were a partisan hack committee. They knew they didn't want to hear the facts. They knew they didn't want to have the truth. We have the other side of the aisle here. They can challenge. They can have a colloquy. They can go into debate. That didn't exist on that other committee. The purpose of that committee was to hang one individual. But when you think the rule of law is for thee and not for me, Hunter Biden and my colleague from California, those sanctions, they're unsurprising. Americans see the corruption. They feel it. They want democratic leaders and powerful rich people to be treated like everybody else. The construction worker down the street sees it. The parents who want to speak out at a school board meeting see it. Traditional Catholics who want to worship their Catholicism and the government tries to spy on them sees it. The millions of Americans that were illegally surveyed by FISA, they see it. And if this committee doesn't unanimously today hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress, Democrat leaders will once again show the world their blatant disregard for the rules of this country and the core values that should bind all of us. Justice for thee, but not for me. The rules for thee, but not for me. The powerful, the rich, the Democrat leaders in control. It doesn't apply to them. It only applies to the people they want to get. God help us, I pray for justice and integrity to prevail today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chairman.